Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana M.A. and
Jackie Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
We talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday. On today's episode, we are so excited to have muralist and graffiti artist Morgan Cook on the podcast. So welcome, Morgan.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We're looking forward to discussing your creative origin story, how you got into the world of murals and graffiti, some of the challenges you've had to overcome along the way, as well as recording a bonus podcast segment on leveraging your niche and pricing your artwork for our podcast supporters at levelupartist.com.
But before we dive into that fun conversation, let's go ahead and give a background to our listeners who may not be familiar with your incredible work. So Morgan Cook, also known as MCK1, is a North Carolina-based muralist with 12 years of experience in public art installations. His signature works can be seen across a variety of projects, from schools to property developments. He draws on his experiences as a graffiti writer to inform his studio practice as well, from the subject of his work to the tools he uses. To spread the knowledge of style writing, he teaches workshops and gives students an up-close and personal look at working with spray paint, developing letter forms, and working as a professional artist. Based in Raleigh, North Carolina, Morgan works full-time as a muralist for commercial and private clients. With confidence and professional poise, he continues to expand his reach in the art world by introducing writing style to an even larger audience.
And that's the formal intro we have for you, Morgan. But how would you describe your work to someone who's never seen it before, especially if they're in the car while they're listening to this?
Yeah, for sure. So kind of like you said, I'm a self-described graffiti artist, meaning that I specialize in writing my name in really fancy, stylish ways. And, yeah.
Very cool. And so I'm curious, I mean, of course, graffiti writing, a lot of people, especially if you're in different cities all throughout the country, you see graffiti throughout on different walls, on trains,
Right.
on different signs. But where did your interest with graffiti art really first begin? And when did that transform into your main income stream?
Yeah, for sure. So initially, the art styles that I was into was specifically like tattooing, and I was really into hip hop. And with graffiti being like one of those dominant elements of hip hop, I was doing like a lot of dancing and stuff at the time as well. So it was already running parallel with me, and I was seeing it like with like all my friends' clothes and just like in the city around me. And then as I moved closer to Raleigh specifically, it was like when I was driving through the city, I could see the bridges and stuff, and there would just be like, I was just a kid like looking out the window of like your parents' car, and as we're going over these bridges, I would see these little pops of color or like these characters that were just like peeking out, and it just like blew my mind because I was like, first, like, how are people getting out here to do this? And like, why is it here? It's like colorful and it looks all crazy. It just seemed like it was this secular world that was separate from everything that I was a part of. And I was like, I have to figure out like what this is. And then with it running parallel in hip hop, it just, yeah, it pretty much just consumed me. Like, I just became obsessed with that specific art form. And like, once I started noticing it, I started seeing it everywhere in places that I hadn't been paying attention to before. And then it really just snowballed from that.
Mm. I love that. I think especially going all the way back to childhood, as you mentioned, like in the car, you're just observing the world around you and recognizing once you see it one time, then all of a sudden you realize it's everywhere in the city around you.
Yeah, your
And
eyes like open up. Yeah. And you're
yeah.
like, oh my God.
And full disclosure, Adriana and I both took a workshop with Morgan, which I feel like was kind of eye-opening to me, like always loving the style, but really learning almost in a classroom and hands-on setting of what these different symbols are, different styles, how you distinguish one artist from another. So what did that look like for you, like first getting into it? Was there like a mentorship of sorts? How did you develop that style?
So coming into it, like around the time that it was still like what I would refer to as pre-internet. And that basically meant that like the access to the knowledge of like what this community was about was pretty much restricted to like, if you knew someone who did it, they had to put you on to all of the knowledge about everything. There were very limited like online forums where you could see photos from like other cities. Really, it was like you had to go outside and just go find it. There was no Instagram to get like endless sources of inspiration or like reference photos to see stuff. So starting off, it was like I just had to it was based off of the couple people that were around me also doing it. They kind of put me on to like, well, this is what this is, and this is how you start your letters, and this is what this means, and this is where that comes from. And then there was a movie called Style Wars that came out. I watched that. That really shed a whole lot of light on the information and kind of gave me like a good reference point for like New York City graffiti. And then moving in past that, later on in life, like right before I jumped into being a professional artist for like roughly 3 years, I had a really close friend who just played like a really key role in like opening all the doors for me and kind of like not really like giving me all of the keys, but like opening some doors and showing me how to open the door myself. And then kind of like laying off to the side and letting me figure out how to like open them up. And then we just kept contact over time. And as I traveled around the world and like went and did different jobs, I just got more and more experience with it and met more people that were a part of it. And that as a whole just eventually snowballed and it got bigger and bigger and bigger.
That's amazing. I mean, I grew up in Puerto Rico, so same as you. Like I grew up seeing the graffiti in the city, under the bridges, on top of buildings where I mean, to me, the first question was, well, the first draw was like, yes, it's colorful and attractive and almost cartoonish in a way, or it can be. So it was
Hmm.
like very popish, very contrasty, and I loved it. And then my second question was like, how did they get up there? Like,
Right.
like
Yeah.
what? Like in PR, we don't have trains, or at least we didn't growing up, and the tram doesn't really count. But so I didn't see it in that sense, but I did see it in the bridges and some of it, and it was always like mind-blowing, and it was so different too, and felt so much more accessible than say the art that was inside the museums, right, where it was
Right.
like
Yeah.
you have to go at a certain day and things like that, as opposed to no, we're on the way to school, we're on the way to the grocery store or whatever, and you get to see some of it all over the place. So same as you, but the other difference here then in the experience, where it kind of drives apart, is I didn't know how to talk to the people or who the people were, because this was the illegal version of graffiti, for the record. I didn't even know how to enter that world. So you got really lucky that you had someone that gave you the in. At least when I was growing up, it's like, I don't even know who to talk to. Like, where does this
Yeah.
start? How do you find them?
Yeah.
Also,
Exactly.
would they talk to me? Because, obviously very male dominated, at least it was at the time.
Yeah.
So it's that question of like, how do I find them? And are they gang people? Because in PR there was that association for a long time. And would they even like show me, or, anyways, there was all these
Yeah.
questions, but definitely it did open that world of like, oh, it doesn't have to be this rococo or Renaissance thing is art. This is art too.
Yeah.
And it can be publicly available and enjoyed and interacted with by anybody that's seeing it. So I absolutely love it. I do want to ask you though. So yes, it's great seeing it. Great that you got that experience, and you mentioned getting some jobs out there. At what point did it go from? And we're obviously going to just focus on the legal parts for our listeners, of course. But at
Yeah.
what
Statute
point
of
did it go
limitations.
from here's an available wall that I can use to I want to get paid to paint on this available wall, as opposed to you investing in, let's just call it, practicing and developing your style on other
Yeah.
walls?
Yeah. So, I was practicing and developing, and I knew that there were some people that were doing it for a job. Like I'm traveling around, and for example, like this specific turning point came when I was living in Colorado, and I could see that there were people that were making a living doing it, but everyone around me and like my family and myself, like I just believed that it wasn't possible because I'm just like, I'm not Picasso or I'm not like a celebrity or something, like it's not going to happen to me. So it didn't even seem like it was a real thing. It was just something that I was so obsessed with and I had to do it. And I like just physically would be ill if I wasn't painting. So I knew that like, okay, this has got to be like my life's work. I got to be like into it at some point and figure out how to make it productive. And it was really like trying to just elevate it. Like you get tired after a while of doing the same thing. Like we write our names over and over and over and over. You get a little tired of it. You want to elevate. And you don't always want to be like, well, I'm on a time crunch. I have 30 minutes or like I have an hour. Now with like a project, I've got 4 times as much wall space. I've got as much time as I want. I've got like my coffee and snacks, and like people are hanging out with me. It's just it's just a different environment. So I think like I just wanted more from myself and more from like what the craft was giving me. So I started looking for opportunities and really trying to just like create my own luck that way. Like I didn't think it was possible, so I just figured like, well, screw it. Like I'll just try anyways. And like if someone's into it, then cool. If not, like I still did it. And yeah, we'll just keep going anyways. It's better than just not even trying in the first part. So I figured like I would just shoot for it and see what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that idea of just making your own opportunities and making your own luck, because I think oftentimes, especially when things may feel impossible or you don't know where to start, that can uh kind of squish people's drive to do it. But I
Yeah.
love that you take kind of that opposite approach where it's almost liberating to not have any expectations of yourself. You're like, well, no one thinks I can do it anyway. So like, what do I have to lose? Like worst case scenario, I try it and it actually doesn't work.
Yeah.
But best case scenario, I'll figure it out. And there is that liberating, like you don't have to follow, which I think many artists feel, like you don't have to follow an exact mold of like, okay, you go to school to be an engineer to do this, and then you
Mhm.
apprentice at an office here, and then you get to this level and that level. Like sometimes it's nice being told what to do, but many artists, it's like we can't not do our craft, as you were
Yeah,
saying.
exactly.
You get
Yeah.
to make your path.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
yeah, and what you said there too is like not just for muralists, but any artist listening, you know, like this is your permission slip essentially. Like go ahead and try it. Like there's nothing to lose. But yeah, we hear this from a lot of artists and a lot of them that we interview that had the same story growing up. They're like, you know, I was told this can only be a hobby or a side thing, and I'd be a starving artist otherwise, and I can, and I don't think I'm that talented and things like that. And the answer is like, well, if you don't try, how would you know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, you really
and
just have to. It's like you really just got to roll the dice, like you, because you really don't know, and like you have to kind of be a little naive too. Like people are gonna
Mm,
call you crazy, and they're gonna call you naive for like the way that you're thinking, but you have to be naive in the sense that like it's a crazy idea, but it's probably gonna work out if I just like really commit and see it through. Not naive in the sense that like, oh, if I just lay back, like everything's just gonna fall into place. Like it kind of will fall into place if you're doing all the legwork on the back end. And that's the
yeah.
naive attitude, is like that this work is worth it because it's gonna pay off. And that's the attitude. Yeah.
Well, and in a way, you're taking the idea, it's almost like you're doing an educated guess in a way.
Mhm.
Because, like you mentioned, it's not like you woke up one morning and said, I'm going to make money as a muralist that specializes in a graffiti writing style. No, you actually had mentors. And on top of that, you were looking at examples of people that were doing it. And then that's part of like what helped. It wasn't like, you know, just this thought that came out of nowhere. You actually did some research and, you know, did some of the connections first and then went from it. So I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is what we want to encourage any artist listening that's like, I don't know, maybe just
Yeah.
ask, you know?
So
yeah.
one thing I do want to add and like specify on that, like um so I did meet some people, right? But in the sense that even though I met them and I say that like they opened doors, it was definitely more like I had to figure everything out myself,
Hmm.
and they wait, and it was almost like the doors didn't open until I was like ready for them to open. And then once like I was ready for it, then people kind of came around and like gave a little advice here or like a little bit there, but like most of it was you kind of just had to like really figure it out, and people are already very like abrasive, and they don't really want to like, you got to think about the community of like graffiti, right? Technically it is illegal in some aspects, so when some random person is just like suddenly trying to be your best friend and be around you all the time, well, this could
Hmm.
be an undercover cop, right? Like you don't
That's
know,
fair.
right? So you're already like opposed to having relationships with people. So it definitely took a while to like gain some trust in the community and just kind of like grow through all of that. And then once you get into a professional level, and I think you have that social proof that okay, like you're here to stay, then people will kind of like warm up to you. And that's really like how it went. It didn't necessarily, it wasn't like as easy as it sounds, but like
In hindsight, it always
yeah,
makes sense. But yeah, I
yeah,
think definitely emphasizing that you were doing the work. Like you're doing the
Mhm.
legwork,
it's just
putting in the
yeah,
time, learning your style. before maybe you even like were known as an artist
Yeah.
socially or professionally, of course. And to that point, I love kind of going back to what you're talking to before when you pivoted to doing murals professionally. There is such a difference between, okay, let me go do tag this train really quick and the adrenaline, and that's such a different mode of expression, I imagine, than having a sandwich and coffee and having 4 hours to do this corporate mural where there's AC and people are engaged and talking to you about it while you're doing it. Those are very different modes of creative expression, which I feel like is that kind of pivot to what many artists face in terms of taking something that you enjoy doing and love, and then how do you pivot it towards making money from it and monetizing it, which isn't selling out by any means, but it does shift your relationship to your creative practice. And so now, looking more towards that business side of it, the MCK1 portion, what does that process look like for a mural project with some of these larger corporate clients or schools? And how much of that client's input affects your design within that process?
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely a spectrum of how it all happens. I'm actually, yeah, like that situation is never ending. There's some clients that like they love you so much that you just show up and they just want you to just be you. They just give you whatever budget that you want. They give you the wall. They let you just do your thing. And then there are some clients where we have to have a very rigorous back and forth, deep contracts, like a lot of meetings on concepts and like really nailing down an idea because sometimes you're working with people that don't necessarily know what they want. And it's my job to be able to ask the right questions to pull that out of them because you're oftentimes working with people that are not very creative. They're very heady or like they're really good at like certain corporate structures and they have their own talents. And that's where I try to say that like my value comes into play because I'm literally like using magic almost to take what's in your brain, put it into mine, recreate something cool out of that, and then like literally create it on the wall for you. So it could be very rigorous. It could be as easy as me just showing up. So it definitely changes. But I would say on average, the process basically looks like an initial consultation where I'm pre-qualifying the client because we don't take everybody on. I basically have like a set like sort of non-negotiables or like standards that have to be hit first before we're actually going to take that project on. Um, but let's say that all of that goes fine, then we move on to the next stage where we basically consult on our idea. We come up with like a rendering and mock-ups where I've taken a photo of their space and we make the artwork on that and we show that to them so that they already have an idea of what everything's going to look like before we actually finish it. Once that's approved, that takes care of like the end portion of there being any kind of miscommunication or confusion at the end of the project. It makes everything super smooth. And then I basically install it. And then there's marketing things that happen on the back end to promote the project and then get new work. But it's basically what I call the virtuous process. If you read that, there's a book, I think it's called The Art is the Way. Is the Way. They talk about the virtuous process in that. And it's just a process of creating work for clients, showing the clients the finished pieces, and like other people seeing you in that process daily creates more opportunities for you by being in that virtuous process. So I pretty much just follow that over and over and over and over as much as I can just to keep that momentum going.
Yeah, that's absolutely perfect. Couple follow-ups within that. Um, for that initial consultation, is that when they find out what your minimums are, or is that something that's communicated in advance of them even reaching out? I'm just
Yeah,
thinking
like
of some artists I've talked to where they're like frustrated, where they're like, yeah, this person wants me to paint their kid's bedroom with Spider-Man all over it for $300. And they're like, why am I wasting my time with this?
yeah. So what I do is typically as soon as you hit my website, there's a little pop-up that says get a quote, you know what I'm saying? And people can type in their information and they automatically like subscribe in and then they're able like I get a little notification from that and I'll reach out to set up a phone call. So before anything happens, we always have this first discovery call. And it's on that call where I basically have an SOP that has like a list of 20 to 30 questions that I'm going to go through every single question and like mark every single one of them. And based off of like how they do on that initial interview, I'll tell them, you know, this is a great fit for us, or hey, I don't think that this is a good fit. I'm going to recommend you to this person, or like, you know, you got to find someone else basically.
Mhm.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think having that process is so important too, especially as an artist's career kind of grows. You can't say yes to every opportunity, as we talked about more. Like,
Yeah.
of course, in the beginning, you are making opportunities happen for yourself, creating luck for yourself, right? But once you get to that point of having that demand and having people, as you mentioned before, that come to you just because they love you, they love your work,
Right.
due
Yeah.
to your very effective marketing strategies with your website and social media, then you have to start becoming more limited in terms
Right.
of who you can take on because there's only so much
Yeah.
time in the day.
And it's okay. Like, not everyone is for you. You know what I mean? Like, I kind of used to have this idea that I was like, I have to get every project. Like, I have to get everything. I have to hit every single wall. I have to get every project that comes across the table. And then, like, I was like, oh, it needs to be like 250,000 projects, right? And then I just started thinking, like, well, like, what if I just did 1,000, like 1,000 really die-hard people that were just like I could do anything and they would just be over the moon with it. Like, and I'm just going to focus on like those 1,000 people, like building a community of just that. And I was like, if I can do that, like that is way more valuable than trying to have like 250,000 people or like 1,000,000 people or something. Like, if I can just get 1,000 people, I was thinking about like what would that look like in real life? Like, if I could get 1,000 people just to be in like a room or like a building. And I'm like, that's way more realistic than trying to do everything, because not everyone's for you. Like, I'm only going to mess with the people that like me for me, not because of who they want me to be, because of some like agenda, you know?
Exactly. Your 1,000 true fans. That's all
Yeah.
Yep.
you need in the business.
And a lot of times, like, there's some clients that want you because of you. And I think
Mhm.
that's like where the branding part comes in. And then there's some people that are just like, listen, we have a bottom line. Like, we want something on this wall. And like, we don't care who comes in here and does it, but like, we just want this thing on our wall. You know, it doesn't like that relationship doesn't really matter to them. It's just a bottom line. So while those projects
Mhm.
are fun and I feel like they can be fruitful and take care of you, you know, you do them every now and then if they're fun, but really, like, these days I try to focus on just the people that absolutely love the aesthetic that I do and they don't really want to like change anything about it. They're just like, you know, do your
Do your
thing.
thing.
That's yeah. Because that's when you have like the best client satisfaction, they get the best reviews, they pay the fastest, the work looks the best, like just all the way across is a great experience. So like, why not spend more of your time doing stuff like that and not the other stuff?
No, that makes a lot of sense. And actually, that resonates. We've had muralists and public artists and commercial painters teams on the podcast, and they all resonate with the same. Like, maybe at the
Yeah.
beginning, not so much, right? You got to build your
Yeah.
name and your reputation. But as they go further along the line in their work, they're definitely observing, like, also, like, from their own point of view, what do I like?
Mhm.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe I want to do that project, but I don't want to be up 7 stories up in the air.
Right.
So
Yeah.
what do? You got to pivot and things like that. So love hearing that. That brings me to my next question. What is a challenge that you had to overcome when painting large scale work that you didn't expect at first, and how did you overcome it? Coming back to that, maybe they do want a 7 story tall, graffiti piece. They're like,
Yeah.
well, hello.
Yeah. Well, I would say challenge wise, like the whole thing is a challenge, just the whole lifestyle career path in itself. And it never ends because there's always like something new happening. So I can't really nail down any one particular challenge. But I just did an artist panel the other day where we actually talked about this and I came up with an answer is that like all of the challenges all together basically gave me, I want to say like 4 or 5 specific like mental skills, and I feel like it's those mental skills that are your weapons against those situations.
Mm.
And some of those skills, I would say, like you could refer to them as tenacity, right? Perseverance, faith, things like that. Like the mental attributes that when you find yourself in a challenging situation, you apply tenacity. And that tenacity is going to help you overcome whatever that specific challenge is because there's so many every step of the way and they can happen at any moment. So that idea of faith and perseverance of being like, no matter what happens, like this is going to complete. And you have a faith knowing no matter how big this wall is or how crazy this concept is, like I'm going to nail it because I'm awesome. And like, I'm so good at this. That's why I was chosen. So it's like those little things are what help you push through challenges, not really like any small particular, like, well, I just drink extra coffee or something. It's not like that.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that that also goes to, I heard a quote a while ago where it was basically saying how confidence isn't walking into a room and knowing that you know everything. It's knowing that you'll be able to figure anything out. And I think
Yeah, it's like,
especially as an artist, it's not like, oh, well, I learned these 4 tangible art skills or art mixing or whatever like that. And that's why I am successful. It's that constant problem solving, having tenacity, having confidence, just knowing that you're going to be able to have the, I don't know, the work ethic and the drive and the creativity to figure out any problem. And then all of a sudden,
right.
your biggest problem today, 3 years from now, is something you're doing like every day. You're just like conquering it.
Yeah. So what I would say though that really cemented that into place for me, like, it wasn't necessarily the art, it was like my past history, like as a martial artist. So when I got my black belt is when I already created in my mind, like, okay, there's these 7 tenets, right, of Taekwondo that I'm going to follow my life by, and this is how I'm going to live my lifestyle. And I know through everything that I went through to get my black belt that, like, if I did all of those things, that like anything else is possible. So I'm really just using that framework, but in the art world against like any challenge. So I would say like that was the preparation for the next phase, which is the handling of the graffiti company.
I absolutely love that. I'm like, as someone that used to do judo and Muay Thai, totally relate because it
Yeah,
teaches you discipline. Like, even when you're like, I don't think I can do one more kick in the air, like my leg is gonna fall off. Your sensei's like, yeah, you can. Yeah, you
yeah,
can.
we can. Yeah,
Even if you do it slow, but do it, and
right.
like there's that encouragement and things like that. And that is the kind of tenacity. I mean, that's a physical one. And for other people, it might be going to the gym or, something
Yeah,
else. But it's that idea of like, no, you have to have the confidence through the way that you have proven to yourself in the past that you had this challenge, like I can't jump this high or I can't punch this hard, and then you did do it, and then you just keep proving to self, yes you can, and then that
yeah,
just kind of builds upon itself. It translates to art too. Like, I don't think I can do a 4-foot canvas, and then you do it and it's like, all right, well, here comes a 6-foot canvas, and you just kind of
yeah,
keep going. So I love that it just builds upon itself. It's something too that we share with artists as well that visit us at art space that are like, I did this painting and it's it's horrible, and we're like, it's cumulative, just keep
yeah,
going. Like,
yeah, exactly.
it rolls over to the next thing you do, just don't stop. Like, you just
Yeah.
gotta have that confidence in yourself to keep trying. But I do want to ask you, of course, we mentioned earlier about taking workshops with you. So you've continued to do workshops, if memory serves, and some mentorship opportunities, of course, for perhaps other artists. So you're helping others now. What is one piece of advice, for those folks that perhaps are outside of the area and can't visit you in person, especially? What is one piece of advice you would give to any artist who is interested in exploring doing graffiti art, or maybe even more generally murals?
Um, yeah, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So you need to look at it as a lifelong fascination and repetition that you're going to be making again and again. And if you can come to terms with that and be at peace with that and not focus so much on everything else that's happening around it, especially like the politics and stuff, because like graffiti writers are some of the most dramatic people you'll ever meet. So it's like, well, if you just have a lot of patience, if you focus and you just do your own thing and worry about that and not so much everything else around you, then you'll be really well off if you're actually going to stick to it. I would say, like, if you've got 10 people that are prospects, one of them is going to stick to it. It's just like getting a black belt. Like, there's some people that just, it's fun for 6 months and then you realize how hard it is and then you just fall off. And there's some people that stick with it forever. So it's just realize that it's going to be a lot of work, but it's okay. And you're not on anyone else's timeline except your own. Like, it doesn't matter how fast you do it or how slow you do it. It should just be about your work and how you feel about like how you're competing with yourself and how are you improving every single time. And if you just take it really slow, yeah. And it's the barrier to entry now is so easy that you're gonna have a way easier time like learning things faster, but you need to have some of those ideas of patience and taking your time with it.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely think with all aspects of art, I mean, in your niche especially, there is that aspect of there is so much information out there. There are YouTube videos and workshops and different classes where you can really, in the beginning, just invest fully into a specific style or developing a new skill, and like that's your entire world. And so you get all of that really quickly up front, which is incredible, like this day and age, to be able to have those resources at your fingertips. I mean, you think about 100, 200 years ago, they could be like, wait a minute, you could have this little box of technology where you get videos from hundreds of other artists, thousands,
Mhm.
millions,
Yeah.
and they'll just teach you how to do their style. Like that would blow former artists' minds. But I do think there is that also then that element of, yes, it's learning the skills and learning a lot in the beginning, but then that true determination and grit and patience comes in once you start to maybe slow down a little bit, or that style gets challenged. You force yourself to have to develop your own ideas, as you mentioned. What do you like? What do you not like? What is your unique style? And that is oftentimes when a lot of artists slow down, or unfortunately maybe stop altogether. And so I love
Mhm.
that idea of just patience
Yeah.
and that drive when it might be slowing down a little bit. That's when the true challenge really starts.
Yeah, definitely. You
And
got
when
to be
thinking,
obsessed with it. Yeah, like if you're not, it's not going to work out.
yeah, I think especially because everyone has so many excuses as to why you don't do something, whether that's
Right.
anything in life, whether that's a creative practice, whether it's fitness, whether it's travel. Like people are very creative, artists and non-artists alike. You can have an excuse as to why you're not moving forward with something. And so
Yeah.
you have to have your reason as to why you are pushing forward with it.
Yeah, and I like what you said about being obsessed. I mean, I saw this book. It was like be obsessed or be mediocre.
Mhm.
And while of course it can be taken to unhealthy extremes, which we would not recommend, I do agree. Like when things get going tough, maybe you're outside and you're in the middle of painting, and then suddenly it started raining, and it didn't even show it was raining, and now you got to deal with the water dripping and the paint, and like, what do you do? Or you knocked over a bucket, like from the scissor lift. Now there's stuff everywhere. It's like knowing your true why, and why you do what you do it's part of what's going to help you. I think that goes back to what some of those tenets and mental fortitude elements you were discussing earlier. That's what's going to help you kind of troubleshoot it and go, shit happens and we're just going to push through it, and no big deal. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Like, what's next? And let's clean this up and whatever, move on. Love
Yeah.
it.
Just keep
Love
it
it.
rolling.
Love it. Yeah.
And on that mark of only comparing yourself to your own journey, what is one project that you haven't done yet that you want to do?
Hmm. I feel like I'm really happy with the kind of work and the kind of clients that I'm working with now. And really, what I'm motivated to do is bring a higher quality of work to them. Is like how can I redefine the process that I'm already like satisfied in working with, and how can I increase the level of that, and how can I make it how can I make the overall experience better for my client is really like what I'm thinking about now. I would say if I had like a dream brand or something, yeah, I mean, I want to work with like Montana colors, and yeah, let's design like a custom color, and like my own spray can. That would be pretty sick. Yeah.
Nice. Wait, Montana or MTN? The original?
Mon-
The
yeah, Montana.
Spaniard or the German?
Yeah, the Spaniard for
Yeah.
sure.
Yes. Love it.
Yeah, good
Absolutely.
research there. Yeah, not a lot of people know that it was split into two companies like that. So yeah, yeah,
Oh,
Barcelona all the way.
yeah. Taking your class actually was part of what helped me with that, because I would see artists using Montana. I'm like, which one has the markers? Which one has the 94? Which one has the gold? Like, and then
Yeah,
taking your class, then of course going down that rabbit hole and spending a lot of money on cans. Thank you, Morgan.
yeah, you're welcome.
The class that keeps on giving. You're like, man, this is expensive. Because yeah, I walk in and Adrian has like a table of cans.
It is expensive. Yeah,
Get a
it is
girl.
very expensive.
Especially the water-based ones, which is a conversation for another day, but I have color-based water-based ones too now.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyways, rabbit hole for another day. Um all right. Well, one of the things we like to ask every guest, Morgan, is how do they define success for themselves, as an artist. But first, we do want to take a quick break and get a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by our Level Up Artists podcast supporters.
If you have gotten value out of listening to our podcast, please consider becoming a supporter for $4 a month. This podcast is our way of sharing it forward, and we get so much value out of these conversations ourselves, but producing a podcast isn't free.
We have personally invested in podcast equipment and video editing software, as well as dedicate our time to produce, edit, and distribute a new episode every week.
By becoming a podcast supporter, you will help us keep the podcast running smoothly and get access to amazing off-the-record conversations with seasoned artists, authors, art collectors, gallery and museum professionals, as well as industry leaders. These conversations offer even more valuable advice for artists at various stages of their career.
You also get access to our artist community platform and our gratitude for keeping the podcast going. Head on over to levelupartisthub.com to sign up and become a podcast supporter today.
All right, so welcome back. Morgan, how do you define success as an artist?
I define success as relative to my freedom. So if I have the freedom to do purposeful work, I have the freedom to make my own decisions, and I have the freedom to work with the kind of people that I want to work with, I define that as being successful. And if I can afford like the latest Nikes, like whenever they drop and I like them, if I can pick them up, like I'm great, I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah.
I love that. And I know we talked about it earlier for advice for other artists, but what is one piece of advice you wish you had heard before you got started on your creative journey?
Yeah, not to take everything so seriously. Like everything is not so, like there was definitely a time I feel like when I first started that it was like every chapter was like a reality TV show and everything was so intense and just like I was just so like emotionally enveloped in all of it that like I could have definitely saved a lot of stress by just relaxing and just being patient. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that has to do a lot with age, honestly, because I mean, I remember being, back in college days and having that drive of like, no, it has to be now. And I have to do this now. And I have to master this painting technique now with this specific brush and, do this thing. Otherwise, it's over. It's like a lot of that. But we also have a lot of more energy. And I feel like, too, as we progress in our creative careers, we become more cognizant of like, that's not worth my time. Like, I'm going to try it, see how it goes. That style, that technique, that medium, it's not a right fit, moving on. And there's less of that rush if I have to do this right now. So love that. If someone randomly hands you $100, Morgan, what would you splurge on or invest in? Has to be something that brings you joy and relates to your art or business.
Somebody gives me $100 and what am I splurging on that relates to my business? Yeah, spray paint. Yeah. Spray paint. Yeah. Even like, like my partner or like my friends or something ask me like what do you want for Christmas? And like I don't ever want anything. I just tell them like you can buy me paint or you can give me like Home Depot gift cards or something. Yeah. Like
Spray Planet gift card.
Spray Planet gift card. Yeah, I would just buy stuff for my business. Like that's all I spend my money on now. Is just
And
I love it.
Yeah,
the gift that keeps on giving.
And shoes, yeah.
An investment into your business, which is like the best kind of gift. A gift that keeps making you more money.
Pretty much, yeah. Like this $100 worth of paint is, like $5,000 in a mural, whatever. Yeah, like
exactly. I love that. Very practical answer. Well, Morgan, thank you so much for being on today's podcast. Real quick before we go, how can our listeners stay in contact with you after they listen to today's episode?
Definitely subscribe to my newsletter. Just go onto my website, sign up for that. It's a brand new thing. I'm going to be putting way more effort into that than any other social. So check that out.
Yes, we love hearing that. I'm like, anybody that's listened to our podcast, we get on the soapbox about, I don't know, at least once a year on please build your newsletter list. It's the only thing
email list.
That it's not algorithm throttled, if you will.
We're working on rented land and an email list is yours 100%.
Yes, it's the only algorithm that hasn't changed in like 20 years. And even if they X out of it, if they archive it, they still see your name every time you send it versus the 2% visibility on Instagram or whatever it's changing to.
Exactly. Awesome. We love hearing that. Well, we'll make sure to link all the things in the show notes. And then Morgan, we'd love for you to stay with us a few extra minutes. And could we talk a little bit about leveraging your niche and pricing your artwork on the bonus segment for podcast supporters?
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. In the meantime, for our listeners, if you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your feedback, have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can connect with us through social media. I'm at May Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sander Studio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we are at Level Up Artists on Instagram. You can also visit levelupartisthub.com to hear the rest of today's conversation and become one of our podcast supporters.
Yeah, and if you do this, this will give you access to amazing off-the-record convos, including the rest of the conversation we're going to have with Morgan, as well as access to the community platform, and you'll help keep the podcast going.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.